Hi, Jeff Watts here from Watts Atelier of the Arts, and this is some upcoming content for our Watts Atelier Online. It's Drapery with Ben Young. If you like what you see, hopefully we'll see you in the program. Happy New Year.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Drape Figure Drawing. Thank you for taking my class. Today we'll be getting into drawing a woman here dancing or in a sari, I guess, or something like that. So let's just get into it. Basically we'll start this very similar to how we start our other figure drawing classes. We'll place the top and bottom of the pose and a halfway point and then a quarter-way point, and then we'll look up there on the model for our halfway point, and that's about the belt line, or the top of that, almost to the navel area, and then between there and the top of the head is about the armpit level. So that would be about here, and then we can look and see how big is the head in that last area. So it probably is about that much. Now we can double check that. Basically the reason we do that is just to get the head size, and so then we can check by in relationship to the photograph. I'm holding my pencil up, my arm is extended, I'm placing the tip of the pencil at the top of the head and my thumb at her chin, and I'm using that to measure how many head units are in the figure. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost 6, a little more than 6. So we can then check here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're a little too big. So let's go here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that should work. And for the most part, I don't even think about these other marks anymore. Sometimes with the pose you have to figure out where to place the head on the page. This one's mostly pretty vertical, so we're probably fine with putting it in the center, but otherwise I would look for a center line from left to right. So in this instance, her hand to her knee, look for the center, and where does the head fall in relationship to that. So it kind of goes through her right eye, so as long as I kind of put that on the center of my page, she should be placed in the center there. So that's how we would get that on there. So let's get into it. So I'm just going to drop in the head shape, so the cranium. All right, so we just pull the jaw off of that head shape, and mostly, paying attention to this width versus height. And then we can connect the neck to that. So just the column of the neck. And I'm gonna have to do a little zoom in here. Okay, then kind of the opening for the collar. And then we add on the rest of the shoulder. And I'm going to look for where that shoulder line is in relationship to the head. So about there. And off at this one, about there. I guess I should have left a little bit more room if I wanted this headpiece on there, but I'm not too worried about that. All right, so just looking at, again, this width versus the height. And that's really important. to look at these big envelopes. Don't get too caught up in all the little parts too early. You want to just look for these big envelopes. So let's see, coming down, look at the angle here. So I just hold my pencil up against, towards the, not against, but just hold it up at arm's length at the model or the photograph. And I look at that angle, and then I bring it down, and I watch my pencil so I don't rotate that angle, but I just bring that down, and then I draw that line. And then if you need to, double check again by looking at that angle, make sure you're correct. And then we can come across at an angle here to where the hip is and see what that angle is. So that helps me to figure out what this length is based off of this width here. Okay, and so that's basically how I'm going to measure everything, is through a form of kind of triangulating like that. And so I'm going to move through this a little bit quicker, but just kind of know that that's what I'm doing. Connect that together. Let's see, come down off of here. So just something like that for the hand shapes for now. And when we come out and we get the hip that comes out a little bit, and then down. So I might use this, you know, kind of line here on that pattern, just to find a plane change or an angle there. All right, let's look at that knee in relationship to there. So I think about like that. Let's see, the foot is kind of right under the elbow here. So then just connect those together. Look for that proportion there. So something like that. There's a cast shadow going off in that direction and in that direction. One thing that I would watch out for, sometimes with the photo you're going to get some distortion, so we're going to have to adjust for that. And what helps is to think about where the pubic area would be, right? About here. So in a standing figure, that's about the halfway point. So I don't really have anything long enough to measure with. Let me see if I can find something. this will probably work. So yeah, it's about a roll of the paper towel, which is about what I have. So it looks a little bit odd in the photo, but I don't think it is really. It's just kind of looks that way. Sometimes it'll throw you off, but I would look at that and try to make basically here to at least where the heel is on the ground should be about that same proportion, which I guess technically if we were to say where the heel is on the ground, which is back here, it's a little bit short, right? So we could drop that down maybe a little bit more, or at least as much as we can. A little bit of distortion is okay. It's just, you know, it'll sometimes look odd, like they have short legs. And it's usually a better idea to have long legs than too short of legs. So if we move that down, you know, then we have that proportion versus that proportion. And we could always scale down the top too if we needed to do that to make it fit on the page. But that's just one way that I adjust for that. And yeah, I think we're ready to get into it. We got our big envelopes established. So now we can start focusing more on the drapery. So let's see, we got, you know, this flap here that comes across. I'm gonna just follow that topography, right? So it has a little fold there, and then it comes down. And we got this kind of wrapping around the corner. We got this cylinder, or this expressing the cylinder of the arm. Let's see, we got So then we just got a lot of folds here. Probably won't get into it yet. So that's probably good for now for that. Just a big triangle more or less. Let's see here. The pant ends about right there. Some bracelets or anklets or whatever here. And you got to add on a little more for the heel. All right, so just those big cut lines in the outfit. And then the next thing I look for is the tension lines and the direction of the folds. So this shoulder being raised, there's a lot of tension off of this area here. So it kind of pulls like that, and we'll see that that spirals out from that spot. That's one thing that's you want to pay attention to and watch out for, is you don't want parallel folds, right? They should be spiraling or radiating, right? So, and you want to look for just how they wrap around these forms. So, right, it's tighter here and then it opens up. Same thing with here. Comes and opens up. And try to avoid repetitive spacing, right? So maybe that's a little bit repetitive. So I'm gonna maybe drop that one down a little more. And here, a lot of times with the sleeve, it's just a cylinder, right? And it's being compressed a little bit along there, so it just bunches up in these kind of ringlets around here. And, you know, they're not always, you know, perfectly perpendicular to that cylinder. Sometimes they're going to have little angles to them and change direction. So maybe something like that, just to kind of get started. At this point, we don't really need to copy exactly what's going to happen with those folds, because if we move them a little bit, that's fine. And when you're working from life, that's going to happen, right? If she gets in and out of this pose 5 or 6 times, each time she does that, the folds are going to be different. So if you're doing this class in preparation for working from life, you just have to realize that that's going to happen and anticipate it. So I start with this still. I just look for the direction of the fold, and then I just would pick, okay, this is a good sitting to draw that area. It looks really nice. The folds are looking good in that one. And I just kind of selectively draw that from sitting to sitting. Maybe I can do this one and that one, or for some complex areas, you just focus on that. And for really complex things that are going to change quickly, maybe just map it out more and then kind of finish it off later value-wise in another sitting. But we won't have to deal with that too much, which is nice. That makes this a lot easier. So we got a fold there. We got this kind of bunching up through here, almost kind of like a diaper fold, but it's very subtle. So we got tension, right, coming from here, let's see, there's something coming from here, I guess off of that armpit, at the belt line, or basically the sari wrapping around there is more causing the tension here at this area, and that'll pull up into there. And that's going to change a little bit depending on how she moves. So that's something to kind of watch for when you're studying, is where those tension points are in relationship to their action. All right, so we get some minor little folds coming along here, nothing too crazy. Not all drapery is going to be pressed and perfect and the most ideal version of it. And depending on what kind of realism you want, you might want all those little folds and wrinkles, or you might edit those out for a more idealized look. So we got some tension coming from here. And this one comes over there. So it's kind of wrapping around this leg, and it can be at different points. You might even get a little bit coming off of this corner here. And a lot of times you'll get some at the knee, which it's hard to see here, but some coming off of there. I don't want to draw that just because it's going to confuse this area. All right, then over here we get this kind of bunching around here more. And so we can actually pull that shape kind of off that form. So the exterior has a lot to do with what's going on in the interior. That's natural for anything really you're drawing, but something to pay attention to. And then a lot of times, we're going to have that coming and wrapping around there. Usually up in that crotch is going to be a strong tension point in any pants or anything like that. So we got that, and again, kind of spiraling out. Sometimes you'll get a little parallel. And it's okay to have it every now and then, but just don't want to do it too much. And then we can see there's a seam along here that's also causing some tension off of that seam. So you can look for that. You can look for even tension coming off buttons, like on a shirt. It's important to think about what's underneath there. Of course, that's what we're trying to express with these forms, is getting them to wrap around the anatomy or the structure, right? So here we get some tension coming off the knee. We can see this billowing in the fabric here as that comes down. It's pretty tight around the thigh and knee here. and then it kind of makes this big shape here, and it's going to bunch up. So we got one little eye here, and then another one, and then like that, and this kind of wraps around like there, and we have this coming down this way, we have this coming down that way. And then we kind of have that cylinder coming down, and then another billowing shape. So it's kind of like a cylinder inserting into another cylinder. And we have this tension coming up to there. All right, so let's get into this front piece of the sari. So let's see, I think this comes over, kind of hits the area here and falls along that, and then it comes down like so, and we get this kind of pleated, folded fabric. And that's really what a sari is just a lot of folds. It's one long piece of fabric that's folded many times and wrapped around. So let's see, we kind of have that coming down there. So this is pretty confusing with the folds, the different, you know, kind of fabric between the red part and the black borders. And it comes along the knee, and it's kind of like this leg is bent slightly, right? So her knee is bent, so this comes at us slightly, and what we're trying to get is that wrapping around that and that in volume. And I think it's going to have to be done mostly with tone, but if we can get something like here, it's kind of wrapping here, the shadow wraps around the leg a little bit. Okay, then we just have this dropping down and kind of zigzagging, right? So it's almost like a flattened pipe fold. And something like that, and then we come down, and then the next piece comes off of that, and we just kind of keep zigzagging along. I think it probably gets narrower as it comes down, or it kind of moves over to the side some. Hard to tell, really. Let's try this a little differently. I'm just going to kind of make some steps there, and then we'll just connect that to that, and there's probably another fold here that I want to get coming down this way. And then we can get a little wave along that. And there's maybe another little section here that comes down like so. All right, then we can get the borders, the thickness of that. So something like that. All right, So yeah, I think that'll work. Looks pretty good. Let's see. So now is just mapping the shadow pattern around these forms. So as a general rule, I would say the shape of a fold is a triangle, right? It's starting wide or narrow and then moving to the opposite or tapering, right? So it sometimes it's more like a diamond. It's like two triangles together, right? But that's what I kind of think about. And it's not always going to be perfectly straight. You know, it might curve over the form. Like right here, it kind of curves over the roundness of the torso here and breast. And then we keep in mind that continues. It just kind of stops right there at that border, but it should continue. And we have another fold here, coming down this way. Now here we have this kind of looser fabric because it's all bunched up here, and then it's, you know, if she kind of was just relaxed, that would stretch across the chest, but here it's bunched up, right? So we get this kind of fold, but now we can just see that how is this shadow pattern wrapping around that. So it's the light's coming from the right side, so we're getting that soft shadow, and then a cast shadow, and then it comes down, and it kind of sits like that, and then it's also behind that necklace, which I forgot to put in there. All right, then we got a cast shadow from the head that comes around that form. So you just got to kind of follow your action or gesture line of this piece of drapery and wrap around that. We want this kind of insertion here. It goes around, and then that fold, right, is coming around here. There's a little bit of an eye, which is that it almost kind of looks circular, but it's still in some ways triangular shape. In this one, it kind of looks just like that at the top, but we could probably edit that out. If it was a little bigger drawing, I could put it in there, but I don't know. At this point, I don't really think it's necessary. So we have that, and then it kind of steps down, and then we have another fold that we have to insert that shape into, right? And so it's bunching up on top of the shoulder, and that adds to that feeling of the shoulder underneath there. And we can see that they kind of spiral out. I want to keep that in mind, how it wraps around the shoulder. So sometimes it can get a little busy and you got to reorganize and simplify these areas. Drapery isn't always presented in the best way. Sometimes it just kind of looks awkward and you got to make sense of it and simplify it usually. So something like that, and then we have, you know, the form shadow along this cylinder, and maybe a little bit of loose fabric there. It's hard to tell. Oh. All right. So that cast shadow just kind of continues there, and we'll just block that in with our 2 value. or just an average value. So we have a light value and a dark value. All right, then we carry that down into, this is rounding along here. And so we're going into a shadow. And then there's a soft kind of cast shadow from the arm even. Just want some even, large marks there. And what I'm doing is kind of making a circular motion as I'm doing that. So that way they are generally pretty soft. If you're not doing that, you'll get a hard edge on the top and the bottom, maybe even on the side of it, and that will be hard to blend in. So if you kind of make it more of a circular motion, then you'll get usually a softer edge like that, and it's easier to blend together. So let's see. Coming down this form shadow here, just along this edge. Yeah, there's a little bit of light in there, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Starting to get a little bit of light right here at this hip. When drawing this kind of pattern, whether it's some kind of medallions or sometimes just more complicated patterns and shapes, usually I like to just put a tone in and then erase that shape out, and I find that works best. I think I should put that up a little higher. All right, we got a cast shadow wrapping around there. And let's just put kind of a gradient coming up from the bottom. All right, we got a cast shadow coming off of that. So we can see kind of almost two shadows here, and that's, telling me there's dual light going on here. So I'm just going to simplify it into one. So it's like a bunch of folds coming together. So it's sometimes like a series of roads overlapping, and you have to be real careful with how you interpret that. So I'll get into that a little later. For now, it's just the block-in stage. So I'm just kind of squinting down, looking for those big areas that I can simplify into a shadow. All right, so there's our kind of simple two-value breakdown. It's got a little bit more than two values, but it's close enough. All right, so then we just go in here and start developing an area. So let's just start maybe with this area here. So there's kind of a secondary shadow in here, right? An inclusion shadow under the arm, where there's less light getting into this area. So that kind of has a shape like that. Generally pretty soft. We'll just blur that out a little. All right, then we come down into here and there's a little fold. Pretty firm edge, like that, coming from that waistline. And there's some probably little pleats or folds in this fabric as well, so I'm just kind of indicating those. And then we have some that are kind of going out in a direction more like that, right? So a little bit different angle than these underneath there. And it starts off kind of sharp and a little firm in that area, and then it opens up as it goes out. Into that kind of triangular shape. And then we can see an actual like lip of probably the sari. And there's a little bit of light on here. This is cast shadow from the arm on this side, and then a little bit of form shadow. And then there's maybe another little dark shape here. Feels like there's some, again, some kind of pleats or folds in that sari. We can see one here, kind of comes down like that. And then we get the side of the arm and body here, which is catching a little bit of light, but I think I'll just simplify that down. There's also, some little folds, just little tension areas under, again, that sari, where that fabric of the upper section is bunched up into that area. So this stuff, especially with all the little ellipses, can take a long time to get correct. So I'd probably just try to indicate it more. So kind of a circular shape like that. And then another one down here, maybe a little bit bigger. And then maybe there's a little connection in between with a smaller circle. And then usually I would just try to find an edge of that needs defining. So like a little cast shadow, like so. So I mean, the best way to represent something, or simply represent something, is just a light and a dark relationship. And so that's kind of how I would approach that. You can even make them a little bit more graphic, which is less three-dimensional, right? And at least just to kind of get started. Something like that. There are some folds underneath all this, which I wouldn't do first, because we won't be able to erase that out, but something like that. And then there's even a little something hanging off the bottom. Sometimes you can draw the dark shape first and then erase out. It's up to you, really. Keep in mind, though, that a lot of that is still in the shadow. It's just catching a little bit of reflected light, especially over here. You see this like bluish color on that one, and that's the fill light for the shadow. So you still want kind of a difference between these ones in the light over here versus these in the shadow. Otherwise, you're going to flatten the image. So I don't want to spend too much time on these little things. Like I said, that could take a whole, hour or so just to draw those. They're pretty complicated little things. So a little cast shadow off of that. That fold, so soft on top, hard on the bottom. And just start with the real obvious folds, the darker ones, right? There's some in here, they're more halftones. And I mean, you can maybe ghost them in just so you have that shape and that proportion of them. And it might help you to, you know, connect the dots between these shapes and get those proportions correct. But for now, I'm just going to focus on the most impactful ones, which would be these darker shadows. All right, you can see this kind of fades off here and goes into the light, but as a form, you might get, you know, like a little bump there as that continues along that contour. You don't want to overdo it, though. It's really easy to over accentuate contours, so just be careful not to do that. So we get that seam through here, so we can see that kind of affects the shape of these folds. And just because there's, you know, 12 of them there, you don't have to put in 12. We can simplify that down. And into this soft form shadow that tucks under the leg. And then a cast shadow over this fold. All right, so then this area is a little tricky. This is too big. So you have one kind of big fold that wraps almost around like that. And then it kind of splits into two sections here. It kind of makes a little Y shape. And a lot of times in that, you're going to have a little flat through there where that cylinder is bending. So if you take a roll of paper, you know, a piece of paper, roll it up, and then bend it, you're going to see that in action. You're going to see how those planes happen when it bends, right? So it tends to have like the little flat spot as it folds. And so that's kind of similar to what's going on here. And then the cast shadow wraps around that. And you want to pay attention to the tapering of these shapes. Again, kind of the triangles. So like it's wider here, narrow right here, where we have another area where it's wrapping around that cylinder. And because of that, you know, it does some things. So let's see, it comes around and we get the shadow underneath that. And then we can see it kind of splits into almost like an X through here. And we get this off the knee, kind of firmer, more narrow. And then it opens up and it softens and widens through here. And it almost kind of becomes this plane like that, right? And then we get this little shape here off of that. And it kind of redirects. So we kind of get this X pattern starting to happen with all these folds. And then this is just the cast shadow, so it wraps. It's kind of like a circular little opening or dish there. And so that cast shadow expresses that. And we you can see that comes to there. A little bit of halftone connecting those, but more or less that comes down. And then we get another little section of light, and then there's a lot of halftone in here. So I might just glaze over that because we're going to need that. Might as well do it over here as well. I'm not really getting into the red complexion of the fabric. I'll save that for another demo, how to address that, which is really not too hard, but just to keep things simple. So you might see these little shapes. You can always, erase them out. It's a good way to get some of the smaller little folds and shapes in there. All right, then this comes from behind there, and even that has like a little fold in that shape, so it kind of Y's around there. We get some little folds coming off of that. We don't necessarily have to put all those in there. It might actually look better to just edit a lot of those out, but let's see. So then we get another one coming down like that, right? And that kind of corresponds with where this is. And it'll start kind of narrow and then widen as it goes up. And we have several little folds coming from that area. And then kind of another fold maybe here. And this seems to fall along those form shadows. Think of the cylinder of the leg, and then it's just kind of the individual folds there, and it's kind of wrapping around those. And then it kind of hits this one, which goes from being more vertical to more horizontal, and that wraps around. And we can see a little bit of light hitting this one here. Generally going to be pretty tight at that knee because of that being a tension area, right? So it's real tight here, loose and bunched up on the other side. So that's just kind of a half tone. There's a little bit of light coming down like that. And then we have light along the other side there. And we kind of get a little shape that comes through there. And it starts to come along that seam. And we get little, light shapes on top of those folds. Of course, you're going to get, a light coming down this, highlight coming down this cylinder. It's going to be pretty soft though. And then it's going to also wrap around each little fold as necessary. So these big ones, I'm going to go ahead and erase those out just so I get that feeling of that light. And I can always darken those if I need to, but I'm more concerned kind of with the shape right now than I am the value. The value can be adjusted by, glazing over it or you know, either with the pencil or with my eraser to lighten things. Let's see, so get these kind of going, spiraling out from here, but these are wrapping a little bit more in that direction, like that. Do kind of bunch up here, and then kind of get this one splitting in two along that. Keep those kind of light. Let's see, let's move over to this other leg here. So I get a little shadow right here as we move from the pelvis to the leg. And then we get, you know, this fold through there, kind of a triangular shape like that. A lot of times these are tricky little shapes, so I would maybe just make something like that and then come back in and cut into that with the edge and the light shape. And then, you know, maybe at the end I'll glaze that all back so it stays within the shadow. You're going to have to get up on the tip for some of these, which will, you know, kind of mess up your sharpening. Where's my other pencil? I'm going to keep that one in a good state for later. So I just want to suggest those. I don't want them to be too sharp. You want, you know, kind of that push and pull, the in and out of how much sharpness or detail is in an area. And, you know, so usually you're going to overdo things. So, you know, as you're focusing in on it, you see more. So once you've kind of drawn it in, then you got to go and reorganize it sometimes in the big scheme of things. You know, how does it look in relationship to other areas? Is it really that sharp? Is it that important? You know, and just knock that back. So it's always a back and forth process, and it might be easier to pull out these little light shapes than it is to, you know, draw around them. So we want a good fold here, and I want to kind of maybe have that correspond with some of these folds, so it wraps around those to help show how it's kind of conforming to the leg more. So we get another deep fold, and then this cast shadow across there, or deep shadow shape, and then a little bit of light on top of that. So it can be a little confusing, and it kind of feels like it's not part of the shadow, but we want to make that clear where that shadow actually falls. And I'd say it's about right there. That seems to be it. And then maybe a little bit up here we could have. So that's kind of the simplified shape of it. And then as we come down here, this rolls under a little bit. Get that, and another little triangular shape. If we need to go in and clean up that little line, and then that little crease coming down there, this cast shadow coming down. So this is very crisp fabric. I don't know if they starch it or something, maybe. Definitely they iron it, I know that. So, you know, makes really crisp, clean little shapes. And we can see kind of at this little corner, right, there's a little shape like that, and we catch a little light there. So it's important to kind of note that as a kind of change in direction along there for the halftones. And we can see off of that one, comes down like so, and we get kind of a darker little triangle there. I guess really just like a little light shape over here as that bends and kind of changes direction. A little bit of a widening of that cast shadow as it goes around the knee, and then connect that back into that form shadow on the leg. So I think all these little horizontal strokes are just part of the pattern. Yeah, it seems like that's what it is. So I'm just not going to put those in there because it's just too much. You know, given the time, you could do it, but right now it's just too much. So I'm not going to get too caught up in the patterns. All of that's going to take a long time. You know, there are ways to shortcut it, kind of like I was showing you how to do the belt, where you maybe block in some tone and then erase out some of the shapes, but it still takes quite a bit of time doing that. And this could look a little confusing, so I'm not going to even put all the pattern in here either. Just focus more on the ones that are on the light or in the light. And then just a little bit of gradient along there. You can always pull out some light shapes if you need to. Okay, let's see, maybe up into this arm. Kind of neglected that area. And we got this dark little stripe here. I want to make sure that's not too dark though, right? It needs to read as being in the light. And then just here we have little folds, so I'm going to say just get on the tip of the pencil, but still kind of think in terms of triangles. We want to have it kind of narrower in one area, maybe widen as it goes out there. It really just kind of depends. You got to look at where the fold is breaking. They're small folds, so I'm not going to get too much into the contour of them because I want to keep them pretty small. And if you start seeing their volume as a bump along the contour, then that's going to make them too big. And it's, you know, easy to just overdo it, so just, and sometimes you got to do it just to kind of get it in there, and then you can come back and simplify it like that. So then we now need to start spiraling out and moving more horizontally across that cylinder. And maybe there's a good one where we get, you know, more bunching here, right? This will be the more stretched out, smoother side, and then we get some bunching here. And we get that insertion of that cylinder, the arm, into that. And that's probably good, just something like that. And then I'll just try to darken that down some more. Just get that softness there, and then can even just come in with the eraser and hit a few of those little folds, and then kind of accent or work around those shapes with the pencil. So same thing kind of with these. It's a lot of times easier just to erase out some shape. So you could just kind of do maybe some kind of zigzag pattern, or, you know, whatever. It doesn't have to be exactly what's going on there. And then that kind of gives you a shape that you can then come around and kind of contain along at least that edge. It gives us a, you know, a little harder edge that we can put a little cast shadow underneath, and, you know, that might be it. I would use this edge here also, where it's a little darker, more halftone along there. This has a little shadow shape, but, you know, maybe losing that into the light in some spots can be nice, so that it's not completely outlined shape around the whole area, right? And continue that up into there. Maybe even go in into some of those shapes, but ultimately kind of letting that fade off, and then you can even glaze over that again. Even here, this little shape will maybe even show up down here as just a little softer, larger little shape. As that kind of spreads out. And maybe get like a little light accent along there. And it's just a subtle thing, but you know, we can look for some of those little hot spots, little planes that catch light. So we can add like a nice little shelf there. And everything needs to be reorganized somewhat. It's not value correct yet exactly, but you know, it has a good design, a good pattern. That's what I'm looking for. You know, there's some areas when I look at it, like this is a little confusing. Is that in the light or is it more in shadow? It's a little bit confusing, so I would probably go in and lighten some of that. You know, and then we need more glazing of halftones across everything. But there's, you know, a good example of how to kind of get started, how to block it in. You do have to design the folds. They're not always going to be presented to you in the best way. So basically design is just organizing the proportions of them, I would say. Because sometimes you'll get like, you know, a dozen that are all the same size, and you might want to vary that. Or, you know, you get these big billowy shapes here, and maybe you want to simplify one and make one a little bit more simple and just big shape, so it kind of draws your eye into that area. Designing drapery is a tough thing to learn. I learned it mostly by looking at other artists that I liked. So Bernini, you know, is a good example, and a sculptor, but you know, he really beautiful folds, really nice shapes, well-designed proportions. And then also just kind of, when you see it in real life, when you see it in a reference, you see a nice grouping of folds. Try to just kind of memorize that, try to understand the aesthetic, the proportions of it, what makes it look nice. It's a balance between straights and curves, you know, big shapes and small shapes. You know, it's basically how anything is designed, right, or aesthetically pleasing, is a combination of those kind of elements. So, you know, we'll get into that a little bit more later. So something to look forward to. Let's see, this is not quite working. Pull that down more. And so you might see some of these shapes as a little softer, maybe a little rounder, and that's okay, you can draw them that way, but kind of like drawing the figure, the more structural you are, the easier it is to see perspective, and you know, you'll just get a better feeling of construction, so by using more straights. So, but you know, sometimes they can be more relaxed triangles and straights. You know, you can use more curves, especially certain fabrics, and you know, the quality of certain fabrics is a little bit different. Some are more soft and not so stiff, so you know, you're probably not going to get too many straights. Like this one is pretty soft, but you know, we can still see a lot of little sharp angles and corners, and so you want to definitely find those and contrast those against the rounder areas. So I think that's probably good. Thank you guys for tuning in.
All right, you guys, if you like what you've been seeing on our channel and you like the content that we've been doing, please like and subscribe. You know the routine. It helps us a lot just to be inspired to want to continue doing this stuff with your guys' support. So we love you guys. It's great having you guys on, watching what we do. We're very passionate about it. We have our online program. We have our brick and mortar. If you guys want to, click below in the description box, you can go link over to our website and check out what we've got going on. All right. Thanks a bunch, and hopefully see you in some more videos. And if you do like this stuff, please share it with somebody, another aspiring artist. I think it would, be really helpful for them. Okay. Cheers. Thanks a bunch.